In this part of the tutorial, we're going to design our functionality. So we've already designed our layout in storyboard or main.storyboard. Now we're going to actually design some kind of functionality within the code. So we're going to discuss the flow of methods in our app and provide a skeleton of the methods. We are going to add some button handlers and again code out the skeleton of our methods and which methods they will call, but we're not actually going to implement them. We'll do that in the next part. And the reason we're doing this is just because I think it's more important to understand the flow of the methods before we implement them, and so that we can get a good idea of how the code is going to flow and exactly how the functionality is going to work within our app. So now we're going to be designing the basic skeleton. So we'll actually be coding, but we won't be implementing the methods. So what we're going to do is I'm going to again design the skeletons. This is going to be adding in the methods and getting used to the control flow as well as initiating some variables, but we're not actually going to implement the methods just yet. Just want you to get familiar with the control flow and how things are going to be handled. So I'm in the main.storyboard right now, and we have our view controller.cs open. Again, this is in iOS, not Android here. Now the first thing we're going to do is if we click on our button, we'll need to add a handler. Now this is unique to iOS. This isn't something that we have to do in Android, but what we'll do is we'll simply double click on the button and it takes us right to viewcontroller.cs and prompts us for a location to add the handler. So if you look here, I get this add event handler. So we can use the arrows to move to another location, enter to select the location, and escape to cancel this operation. So I'm just going to go down a little bit with my arrows, and I'm going to put the handler after the viewDidLoad method. So you see here this blue line, this is where it's going to go. And if I just press enter, we have our button handler for our button calculate already. Now the reason we need to do this is because this is what's going to basically trigger the button handler. So I'll go into that in just a second here. So this throw new not implemented exception, we don't need this anymore, so we're going to select it and get rid of it. I'm just going to highlight and delete. And this stuff here, so from here to here, this button.accessibility identifier and this button.touchup inside, I'm going to cut, so Command X, and I'm going to paste inside the button handler method. Okay, so this is where our button handling is going to take place. So code is going to run through here, it's going to come to here, and then it's going to basically initialize the button to perform a task when pressed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method. This one's going to be I'm just going to say void. This is going to be press click button. How about that? Okay. And so if I just set that up, I'm actually going to take this stuff here, so the button.touchup inside, not the first line but the second stuff. I'm going to again cut that, so Command X. I'm going to paste it in here, and here I'm just going to say click button. So this is basically just going to, this button calculate touch up inside, when the code comes to it, is basically going to assign this, and it's going to call the click button function, and the click button function is going to perform some kind of a task when the button is pressed. For now, again, we're just going to fill out the skeleton, so we'll not actually implement this just yet, but this is where our handler is going to be. This is where the main functionality for the button press is going to be. Now another thing to note is we have button.accessibility identifier and button.touchup inside here. This is corresponding with the old button that was created when the project was initialized. We don't need it to be called on this button, we need it to be called on our button, which is called btn calculate. So we're just going to select that and replace it with btn calculate so that it actually corresponds with our button that we created. And I'm just going to change this to calculate button. And another thing, this int count is not relevant anymore. We don't need that, so I'm going to select it and delete it. Okay, so right now we have the viewDidLoad, which is going to get called, and then it's going to come to this button calculate underscore touch up inside, and that's going to call the click button. And the click button is not going to do anything right now when the button is pressed because we haven't filled anything out. So let's go ahead and fill something out. We won't implement the whole thing, but we'll have some kind of a method call. In fact, let's put that after we create the method. So once this is calculated, or once this is pressed, we want some kind of calculation to be performed. So let's create a method that would do that. So let's call this void calculate final investment, because that's what it's going to be doing. And we'll just start that up, and let's call it in here. So calculate final investment, and this is what's actually going to perform the calculation, this function, and it's going to be called by the click button. So when the button is clicked, code is going to run this method and perform the calculation. Now, it's cool that we'll perform the calculation, but unless we call it to actually print out the final value, nothing's really going to happen. It's just going to perform the calculation and nothing will be displayed. So now we need to create a print function. So if we go to down here and we say void, let's call this print function. All this is going to be is a function that will basically assign a value to our label. So if we go back to the main storyboard and we look at our label, right now it says final investment value is. What the print function is going to do is it's just going to change the value of this text to display our final investment value. So it will just change this text. That's all the print function is going to do. Alright, so now we have all our methods in place but not implemented yet. So just to recap, the viewDidLoad is going to run, then we're going to get the button calculate underscore touch up inside running. That's going to call the click button, which is going to call the calculate final investment, which is going to perform the calculation and then call our print function, and then that's going to do the actual printing. So this is our flow here. If this is going a little too fast, then take a moment and pause to really understand this flow, because this is very important. In this part of our tutorial, we focused on designing the functionality. So we designed methods first to handle button clicks, and then those methods called the calculate method, and then that calculate method will call the print method. So again, we didn't actually implement any functionality within these methods. We just kind of designed the control flow and declared these methods. So by now you should be able to understand the flow within our app, so which functions will call which functions, and be able to design functionality without implementing methods in any small app. Implementing methods is the harder part, but I think it's important to get an understanding of the flow and which methods are going to call which before we actually implement them.